Relativity effect. 100 people were offered 3 options to choose from. 16 of them chose the first one, none chose the second one, and 84 chose the third one. After that, the second option was removed, and this time 68 chose the first one, and 32 chose the third one. This doesn't make sense. The second option was just a decoy, being clearly worse than the third one. So removing this option shouldn't change the results, but it did. This shows the human inability to perceive absolute value. We choose by comparing similar options, and we're more likely to choose the option that is easier to compare with something. This is also one of the reasons for cheerleader effect. Anchoring effect. Group of students was presented with items for sale, such as wine, book, and chocolate. They were asked to write the last 2 digits of their security number and answer if they were willing to pay this amount for each of the items. After that, each student was asked to write the highest amount they were ready to bid for each item. The final digits of a security number is a completely random value, so it shouldn't influence the amount students were willing to pay. In reality, students with high security numbers were willing to pay around 3 times more than students with low numbers. This experiment shows how first impression, even if it is random, imprints in our minds. Other experiments also showed that this anchor is long-lasting and difficult to change. This effect also shows flaws of very common supply and demand theory. In practice, supply and demand aren't independent. We saw that the price of the product can actually influence the amount that customer is ready to pay. Zero price effect. Some people were presented a choice to buy Lindt truffle for 15 cents or Hershey's Kiss for 1 cent. But they could only choose one of the options. About 73% of them chose the truffle, and 27% chose a kiss. Then the prices of each of option were reduced by 1 cent. Standard economic theory tells us that the results shouldn't change. But not 69% of people chose the free option, and only 31 chose the truffle. The experimenters also tested whether reducing the price from 2 cents to 1 cent has the same effect. It doesn't. People react to free items irrationally. Many companies use this effect by offering a free shipping or a free item if you purchase something. Social and market norms. There was a daycare center in Israel where parents were often late to pick up their children. To combat the problem, the center imposed a small fine for arriving late. The expected result was that parents would stop arriving late to not pay the fine, but the outcome was opposite. The number of parents that arrive late actually increased. Social and market worlds are 2 worlds that don't intercept. By creating a fine, the center replaced the social norms with market norms. Before the fine was created, parents felt guilt for arriving late and were more likely to pick up their kids on time in the future. But if they have to pay a fine, now they see it as a market exchange. They just buy their permission to arrive late. This shows us how replacing social norms with market norms can harm us. Also, the effect is lasting. After the fine was removed, the situation didn't improve. So it's difficult to go back to social norms after introducing market norms to the relationship. Arousal effect. This one is a little weird, but an important one. The participants were asked to imagine that they were sexually aroused. They answered a series of questions. The first set was about sexual preferences. For example, would you find women's shoes erotic? The second set was about likelihood of engaging in immoral behaviors. Would you encourage a date to drink to increase the chance of sex? The last set was about unsafe sex. Would you always use condom, even if pleasure is decreased? Several weeks later, participants were asked to answer these questions again, but now they were asked to masturbate, so they were really in an aroused state. The results were frighteningly shocking. People can't predict their behavior in aroused state. In the aroused state, the likelihood of engaging in somewhat odd sexual activities was 72% higher than predicted, and the likelihood of immoral activities was 136% higher. Also, this effect is likely applies to other emotions, such as anger or fear. Procrastination. The professor had 3 groups of students. He set no deadlines for the first group. For the second one, he set the strict deadlines for 3 tasks spread evenly across the semester. And last group was presented with opportunity to set their own deadlines. Every day after the deadline, the grade for a task was reduced. So it seems that first group had the most favorable conditions. And the rational decision for the third group was to set all the deadlines on the last day. But in reality, most of the students decided to spread deadlines evenly. More than that, the results showed that the first group had the worst grades, while the second had the best. All humans are prone to procrastination, but the third group performed much better than the first one, which shows that simply setting our own deadlines can help with procrastination. The same applies for other activities. For example, you should put strict schedule for workouts with some external punishment if you break the rules. The ownership effect. Some students spend days in tents to attend a basketball game. An air horn is sounded at random times. If some student doesn't check in within next 5 minutes, he is moved to the end of the line. Right before the game, the students are allowed the chance to get the tickets. Some of them get the ticket and some of them don't on random. But how much do they value the ticket? All of them spend days to get the tickets, so they must value it very high. When the students that won the ticket were asked to sell it, they asked for $2,400 on average, while the students that didn't win the lottery were willing to pay no more than $170. But why this discrepancy is so big? The ownership actually increases the value of an object. The owners of the tickets explain that they love basketball and will never forget this game, while non-owners explain that they can just watch the game in a pub and $200 is a lot of money. Companies use this effect everywhere by offering free trials and money-back guarantees. Open doors. MIT students were presented with a simple game. They had 3 levers they could pull. Every lever gave them some return randomly selected from some range. They had 100 tries, and the task was to get as much money as possible. The simplest and effective strategy was to try each lever several times, choose the one with the biggest return, and pull it every time. But then the rules were changed. Now, if they didn't pull one lever for 12 times in a row, it disappeared forever. Notice that this actually doesn't affect our strategy at all, because when we find the best lever, we shouldn't pull other levers anyway. But all of the students started to pull all the levers, making sure they wouldn't disappear. Even when experimenters told students the real expected return for each lever, they still wasted their pulls to make sure none of the levers could disappear. This experiment shows how humans are irrationally afraid of losing options even when we know which option is the best one. It happens everywhere in our lives. We waste our time on dead relationships or activities that we don't like. Expectations effect. The subjects of experiment were offered 2 glasses of beer. They looked identical. Most of the participants told that they liked the second one more. In the second part of experiment, participants were asked the same question, but this time they were told that the second beer contains vinegar. In theory, the results shouldn't change. They still would taste the beer and choose the best option. But this time, most of the people chose the first beer. This shows how human expectations can change reality. We are more likely to enjoy the food that looks good or enjoy the movie that has good rating. This also explains the existence of stereotypes. Interesting fact is that often the subjects of a stereotype believe in it, even if they themselves don't notice it. Placebo effect. In the past, surgeons used to perform an operation where they would open a chest and tie off internal mammary artery. They had believed this helped with chest pain until 25 years later, scientists conducted a proper research having 2 groups of people. Patients in first group went through real surgery, and other patients just got their chest open to imitate the surgery. The results showed that both groups stated the same level of satisfaction. This is just one of many examples of placebo effect. In another study, researchers found that people get better effect from more expensive painkillers, even if the drug is the same and only the price differs. This raises a series of questions. If people get real effects from placebo, is it really a problem? And if it is, how do we solve it? Conducting a proper study isn't a simple task. Suppose that we want to test a new cancer drug. This means that half of the patients wouldn't get the drug, but a placebo instead. But what if the drug actually works? This means that we sacrifice the lives of all the people in placebo group. Cash effect. 3 groups of people were given 5 minutes to solve 20 problems. All of the participants got 50 cents for each correct answer. The first group participants had to give the answer sheet to the examiner, while the participants from the second and third groups were asked to check their answers themselves and tell the number of correct answers. The only difference between the second and third groups was that participants from third group, instead of getting paid 50 cents immediately, were given special tokens that they could exchange for 50 cents. The participants in the first group solved an average of 3.5 questions correctly. The participants in the second group claimed to have correctly solved on average 6.2 questions. But the mind-blowing thing happened in the third group. They claimed to have solved on average 9.4 questions, even though the conditions were almost the same as of the second group. Changing the prize from cash to something else made them cheat much more. This shows how people are more honest when dealing with cash. Most people would never just take cash from someone else's wallet, but it is okay for them to steal someone else's pen. This is actually a little bit frightening, considering that the world moves away from cash.